Yeah. Hey guys, all right, just before the show starts, I wanted to let you guys know that my fight against cancel culture is still happening. Please go to the description below. There's a link titled Support My Fight Against Cancel Culture. If you want to help my fight, please consider giving a bit of a donation. All the information's in that link. With that being said, enjoy the show.
Hi everyone and welcome to Let's Get Real. This is only the second episode, but I'm hoping it'll be just as juicy as the last one. So tonight we're going to be talking about something that I think is on every South African's mind. It's a problem that we hear about daily, and it's certainly a problem that we need to address, and that is how are we going to tackle inequality in South Africa? So this evening I have a very interesting guest with me. His name is Dions. He's a saxophonist. He's the founder of the Party for Equality of Opportunity, Prosperity, Liberty, and Equity, and he's also the founder of the Reasonable Market Foundation. Welcome, buddy. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Dioné. It's great to be here. Just want to thank you for having me. Just one little correction: it's the Responsible Market Foundation.
Is it responsible? Oh, I thought
yeah, that's right.
Apologies. Okay, thank you for correcting me. That's
no
not
problem.
cool. So I thought as a starting point, it would be really helpful if you could just give us a bit of your background. So you're a South African musician and you've clearly taken a massive interest in inequality in South Africa. How is it that you came to be so interested in this problem to the point where you actually, were very hands-on and founded these organizations and got really involved in that?
Yeah, so I was a teenager when Nelson Mandela was released, and I went to the parade the day that that he was released, and I was one of the crowds that went to go see him. And just growing up in those times, or being a young adult in those times, was quite. Everyone was kind of caught up on that optimism, and we thought that we were going to, things were going to change, and country was going to blossom, and it soon became apparent, like as it got towards the turn of the century, I started realizing, hold on, there's something funny going on here, because nothing's actually changing really for most people, and so I started to get interested in why that is, and what we doing what people say that we should do, and all that kind of stuff, and why aren't things changing? So I started researching, and I realized that the economics that we follow in South Africa is very different to the economic systems that successful countries have followed. And I really started looking into that, and I started to kind of to analyze the system, and I found a few real, like, let's say, kernels of truth. Where the real kind of the real reasons why we are stuck in the situation that we are. And one of them was that the pay gaps in our companies haven't changed. They haven't changed since apartheid time. So what's happened is we've put in all these systems that are supposed to create equality. A lot of them are like race-based systems, and though they've had some kind of marginal success, and we've had a change in the makeup of the rich and of the middle class, for most of the poor people, there's still a lot of poor people in South Africa. It's still just as bad as what it was back then. So, and the reason is because, well, one of the way that I see it is that you can't change inequality if you actually don't change the financial inequality, because that's what it is. Mm-hmm. You can change, if you change the makeup of who makes up the rich and who makes up the middle class, it's not going to really make a difference. you actually have to put in place measures that's going to get the capital down into the population, into the communities, that can stimulate so you can stimulate the economy through demand. People can save, they can invest, they can spend, and when they do that, they're creating a vibrant economy. And that was the one thing that I really started getting passionate about, because nobody was really talking about it. It's kind of, well, I mean, a few people are, but I think there's a lot of focus on kind of racial stuff, and very little focus on the real financial things that can be done.
Yeah.
And then also the other thing that I noticed was that the way that we approach our monetary system, the economics behind our banking system and our central bank is very different to how the successful countries of the world actually manage their banking systems and their central bank. So those two are the kind of things that I focus on in my economics. So yeah, that's.
Okay. No, that's great. So we're going to get into the nitty-gritty in a moment. Leave you in suspense for a moment longer. Before we get into that, though, I just think it's important that I just frame the terrain and clarify exactly what we're talking about, so that we can stay focused and not go off on pointless tangents. So to start off with, we need to just draw a distinction between income and wealth, because they're not synonymous. So when we're talking about income, we're talking about what's coming in on a monthly basis, so it'll be your wages and your salary. But when we're talking about wealth, we're talking about a stock of valuable possessions. So that could be your property, your cars, your stocks, and your bonds. The problem with wealth, though, is that it's not that easy to measure, because, for example, when it comes to certain assets, you can't assess their value. Often you can only assess their value when you actually sell them. And then there's another point I wanted to make. Oh yeah, shares can also be held in trusts, and that's often difficult to link to individuals. But having said that, we still think that wealth is a better indicator of well-being, precisely because wealth can generate further income. So if we're talking about stocks and shares, those will pay dividends and they'll pay capital gains. And then when it comes to your bonds and savings, obviously you're generating interest on that. So generally, when we're talking about inequality, we're going to be talking about inequality in terms of wealth. And the other question that I don't think people talk about a lot or mention a lot, so people, I think, are often confused about why should we even care about this question? So why is inequality a problem? And so one of the reasons is that if you're a democracy, then part of your value system is that you uphold equality of opportunity. And so that's just the idea that an individual's access to basic opportunities can't be impaired by factors that are outside of their control at birth. But currently, we see that income is having a massive effect on people's access to basic opportunities, and it's often along racial lines. So that's one reason. If we are a democracy and we say we value equality of opportunity, then we need to pay attention to inequality. Then the other reason is because inequality is often an indicator of a very unstable society. So if you look at the World Inequality Report and you look at the countries that are the most unequal, you'll also see that they are often the most unstable societies in terms of their politics and their economic situation. So those are a couple of reasons why we need to care about it. And Buddy, if you want to add some more reasons, by all means. But so
Sure.
go ahead. Yeah, go for it.
Sorry. Yeah, just I mean, there've been quite a few studies showing the link between inequality and social problems like, violent crime, school dropouts, that kind of, alcoholism. So there's a social aspect to it as well. There's what Dioné just mentioned about the when you have inequality, you've got a lot of turmoil, and the turmoil is like it also has an effect on the economy, because the people that want to invest in economies, they like stability. So there's that, and then also the fact that, for me, this is a big one, and I think speaking to a largely libertarian audience on this podcast, I think maybe you guys will identify with this, is that it's inefficient, to have an unequal economy, because the distribution of money in the economy is what drives the economy through demand for goods and services. So you've got if you have a certain amount of money supply in the system, and if that money's all top and there's no one else, there's a few people at the top have got the money, and the people most of the people don't have much money, then you have less economic activity. So money is kind of like the fuel that gets economies going. And so if you get the money down into the bottom, more equal societies have got more demand in ratio to the supply of money. So what happens with really unequal economies is that in order to get it going, you need more monetary stimulation. So the central banks start pumping money into the economy and that kind of stuff. And then you're getting it's an inflationary environment where just to get the economy going, you're creating inflation. And you could get the same amount of demand with just the money in the system, if you can just get the money from the top down to the bottom. So there's that. It's the inefficiency of inequality as well. And that's quite important.
Yeah, that's
and then you get jobs and all that kind of stuff on there. It's almost like a self-fulfilling thing. The more unequal you are, the less demand you have per money supply, and then less jobs and more inequality.
Great. So clearly we need to pay attention to this problem. It seems that it really doesn't matter what political persuasion you come from. It is a problem for all of us. And so what the standard sort of narrative we see when it comes to this topic of inequality, so if we're looking at places like organizations like Oxfam, is, tax the rich. That's essentially the narrative we get. Is, well, to solve this problem, you need to tax the rich. So we'll keep that on the back burner, but that is generally what people say one should do, and I have my reasons for rejecting that. But for now, let's turn to what do you think needs to be done to alleviate inequality in this country, and feel free to go into quite a lot of detail, because I think that if given what you've told me before about it being the way we look at the financial system in this country, the way we approach it, I think people need to hear that a certain amount of detail to understand what an alternative solution would look like. So, so please.
Thanks. So, if you look at there's a few ways to reduce inequality. So the one way is to get money that's in the system from the top from a few people to the broader population. And one way to do that is taxation. But the thing with taxation is that it's going to go through government. So the more you tax and spend, the bigger your government's going to be, and then you have the government as the middleman, which is notoriously inefficient. Personally, I don't have a problem with taxing the rich, but I do think that the rich have an option. There's a better option for everybody, and that is for them actually to spread the wealth before it actually gets taxed. In a way that so one way to do it is to moderate the pay gaps of companies. So the people in charge, because it's almost like we have to kind of take our agency back from the idea that the market governs our actions. I think a lot of in the Western societies, especially, there's a kind of it's almost like a religious belief that we can cede our own choices to this thing that's the market. So you have it's like when you have a pay gap in a company, you have executives earning 300 times more than the guys at the bottom, even more. Some companies it's thousands of times. And the guys at the top are like, well, it's the market. Yeah. And what that does is that it's actually they're ceding their responsibility, because that's their choice to take that money themselves. They don't need to take 300 times more. They would probably be quite comfortable living on 20 times more. Mm-hmm. But because there's the system that's in place and it's kind of acceptable, and this belief systems that we have in that it's okay to do that. So, but what happens is that when you have someone that's earning 1,000 times more or 300 times more than the workers, is that you get this extreme inequality, and then you need to have, if you're going to have, like, once you have that extreme inequality, then how do you get that equal opportunity in that situation between like someone that's growing up in the household of someone that's earning 300 times more than someone else? How does he have the same? How does the other people have the same opportunity? So then you start getting, okay, well, we need to tax, and then you're getting government as a middleman. But we could actually say, well, listen, why don't we just all have a system in place where if you have a lower pay gap in your company, then your company gets taxed less and you get taxed less, because you're essentially doing what the government would do, but you're spreading money, and it's organically without any middleman, so it's much more efficient, and it's going to the people that are actually working in the company, so they're creating the value, and you're just taking the value that's being created in companies and going, okay, listen, instead of just allowing, because the market says, or because of the bargaining power that's in place, I think people also need to start thinking about bargaining power when it comes to wages, and start to understand, or at least be cognizant of what it is and why people have that bargaining power. And a lot of it's got to do with privilege. If you grow up in a rich household and you go to a good school and you get to university, and and you find yourself in a position where you're applying for a job, and it's you're earning a lot of money. You're in a different position to someone that's grown up in poverty, who never had the same kind of schooling, and never had the role models that you had, all that kind of stuff. So it's just a kind of an awareness or a consciousness of the privilege that we have in our situations, and going, well, are we going to exploit that privilege, or are we going to actually just act responsibly about it and go, well, we don't need to take R1 billion for us. Nobody needs $1 billion. When if someone in your company is struggling and you're earning $1 billion, I mean, and then you say, well, it's the market. It kind of doesn't make sense. And then you get all these inefficiencies that happen, and the social, it's a basic disrespect that gets pushed through into the whole economy, and that people feel that disrespect, So it's like, and you start getting these animosities between classes and stuff like that. And it doesn't have to be like this. So it's the choices that we make as individuals in those situations. Um, what I'm trying to get people to think about is just to take responsibility for their own actions and their own choices. And I think if we do that, then we wouldn't actually have a lot of the problems that we have.
Yeah. So, so when you, through the organizations, when you try and focus on spreading awareness about um, addressing these pay gaps within companies, I mean, how do you communicate that? Do you go to companies and try and persuade them and say, look, this is something you have to do if you want the economy to, like you say, run efficiently. If you want this economy to work for you, then this is, how do you approach that? I mean, because like you say, there are so many belief systems that are so deeply embedded. How have you tried to dismantle?
So I mean, as you know, I'm a musician, and up until the COVID shutdown, I've actually been quite a busy musician. So I'm doing a lot. That's my income, and that's what I make money from. So the Responsible Market Foundation, I've been doing it kind of on the side, and it was a website for until the lockdown happened, and I would basically be directing people to the website through social media and get, just try to raise awarenesses of the benefits of moderating our pay gaps. And so I haven't really had time to like go around to companies and all that kind of stuff. But when the lockdown happened, I actually realized that this is something that it's one of my passions, and so I'm thinking about taking it to the next level. But who knows? I mean, music might start gigging every night again and not have much time.
No, right. You also pay bills.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so the one thing I'm curious about is some people would say, look, well, we've already got, like you mentioned earlier, we've already got something. We've got the Employment Equities Act, and that is about equal pay for equal work, and that is already something we have in our regulations that we're supposed to enforce in the workplace. And that act was initiated in 1998, and since then we've seen inequality just worsen. So clearly, again, the government stepping in to say, look, you've got, which is essentially what they're, if I'm understanding it correctly, that's essentially what they're doing, is they're saying to companies, we need to fight inequality by also reducing that inequality within the salaries within your company, and also making sure that people aren't disadvantaged for, not having the same.
I don't think that's what it's actually doing, though. I mean, if you look at the companies, we see companies with pay gaps of hundreds of times. I mean, there was one company a couple of years ago where the CEO got literally like 1,000. It was thousands of times more, because he made 650 million one year in bonuses, and the guys working behind the till were earning like just around minimum wage. So it's literally thousands of times more. So there's no way that they have limited the gap. When Marikana happened, the CEO of that company was earning tens of millions. That was without the bonuses, but just in salary. And his job was to tell the guys going down and drilling on the mine and risking their lives that he couldn't pay them more. How do you have someone that's earning like 30 or 40 million rand telling someone else, we don't have money to pay you? And I think people aren't. I mean, if I was working in that situation, I'd go, well, that doesn't make sense. Surely if someone can take that much money, then they're talking rubbish. So I think that's where a lot of the animosity is coming in, and because there is that, it's almost like dishonesty that's happening in the system, and
Yeah.
people aren't fools. They know that.
Yeah, but I mean, I suppose my point is more that it's a question of, so we've got these two forces. We've got the market, and we see that we've got corruption that exists in the market. I mean, looking at, these inequalities that exist, and all kinds of injustices that occur when, businesses, find loopholes and build monopolies and take advantage of people. But then on the other end, we've also got the government, which is also notoriously corrupt. So the idea is that we have to think, well, how is the one going to keep the other one in check? So for example, with what you're suggesting about trying to get these companies to create salaries that are not so unequal, how would we do that? Because you're saying, let's say that companies get a tax reduction, the more equal their salary amounts are. Now, I think in theory that sounds feasible, but again, I mean, I'm bringing in the example of the Employment Equities Act because I'm saying that even though you have these regulations, these mechanisms that are supposed to force bodies into doing something you want them to do, at the end of the day, given the nature of the beast, they will find a way to get out of that.
Yeah.
So, and it's not because I disagree with you, it's because I'm trying to think of what is a solution to this problem that we can say is feasible. And the one thing that comes to mind is when you say in one of your articles, you talk about money as being literally the blood of a system. And it has to fuel that system, it has to oxygenate it, it keeps it functioning optimally. But at the end of the day, the money is also it's a mechanism and it's a representation of value. And the value is people's skill, like people producing products and services that are valuable. And if companies were to, so yes, I agree with you, we can obviously do the easy case. And the easy case would be we've got a CEO who's earning 1 million times more than the lowest worker. And we can obviously isolate unethical cases that are the extreme. But I'm thinking of it more in terms of the ordinary cases that are maybe not on the extreme end. And it seems that the proposal would then look like you're artificially interfering in the market and saying the market is not going to determine your salary. We're going to adjust salaries so that we create a specific kind of balance. But how do they know what balance they need to strike for that system to work? And essentially, how can it be justifiable to pay someone something that they don't have the skill to match it? So basically, they don't have the skill set you need, but you're paying them more because you're trying to reduce that inequality. That's also because the money is also an incentive for performance, it's an incentive for skill development. So my concern here is that the moment we start fiddling with it, we're looking at unintended consequences as we always do. So essentially, how does this not look like some sort of socialist agenda? Because
I think first, sorry to interrupt. I think the first thing is to recognize that that the system that we have now, if you look at the what they call the market system, where the market determines wages and stuff like that, I think the first thing we have to realize is that it's first of all it's not necessarily rewarding value added or rewarding risk taken.
Okay.
What it's rewarding is bargaining power. So in the system that we have, where we have extreme poverty and inequality, bargaining power is skewed, and it's often got to do with injustice. So of the past or justice of the present. The system that's set up in the way it is. If you're growing up You could be adding value in a company, but because you don't have bargaining power, you can be exploited by somebody that's got a lot of bargaining power and can get you to do work that's adding a lot of value and maybe very risky work for much less than they would pay somebody who, if there was a system with less poverty and less, like if you look at mining, for instance, in somewhere like Australia, you'll find that miners in Australia they earn good wages. They're like upper middle class, whereas miners in South Africa are like really poverty stricken. So that's it's basically. So we have to start with that understanding first if we're gonna think about how to address this and then once we have that understanding we go okay what can we put in place in order to what is justifiable.
So I just want to ask there, when you say bargaining power, are you talking about someone's ability to feel like they can negotiate better wages because they come from a better background, so they have that confidence and that privilege to be able to use that? Yes. Is that what you're talking about? Okay.
Yes. If you for instance, if you're starving and you don't have food to feed your children, and you go out, you've got something to sell. You will sell that thing for much less than somebody who's well-to-do. Probably won't even sell it. You'll just keep it. So it's like it's just if you've got something valuable to sell and you're in a position of power, you can negotiate a higher value, and that's why inequality keeps getting worse, because the more bargaining power you have, the more you can take for yourself, and the less bargaining power you have, the less you're going to take. So it just makes, and then you end up getting more bargaining power and less bargaining power. So it's a system that just keeps on spiraling.
Yeah, but again, though, once you interfere with that system, so if you introduce, for example, minimum wage to make sure that people do have bargaining power, just purely through the law, they can't be paid less than that. That also has unintended consequences where people will not employ people at that wage because it's not worth their while, because that's not, so people who could otherwise have a job where they would be paid less than minimum wage, but they would still have some money, now have no money because the government is trying to dictate to people what wage they should pay. And so that's also a situation.
I agree that things have got unintended consequences. I'm not sure really about whether or not minimum wage has as bad an effect on economy as what you're saying, because from what I've seen where it has been implemented, often the economy has actually got better because you've actually forced a bit of that money down into the bottom and there's more demand and all that kind of stuff happening. So there's quite a few studies that show that where minimum wage has been put in place, that businesses actually start getting better. But having said that, I do see your point about, if you want to employ someone and you don't have the money to do that, then you can't employ them. So that's one of the great things about the pay gap moderation thing. It's like if we had a system in place where you said, listen, if you want to pay someone less than minimum wage, and it's okay as long as you yourself you don't get a certain amount of times more than that, and then that would actually allow companies to become more competitive. You'd have more startups. You'd have more struggling companies could drop the wages of the workers, keep more people employed, as long as the shareholders and the executives weren't taking a lot for themselves. It makes sense, and it's moral. It makes moral sense. It makes logical sense. I think what happens if you take away minimum wage under this kind of system of the market, where there's that excuse of, then there's nothing in place to stop people from exploiting the disparity in bargaining power, is that you're going to end up getting far more inequality, because you're going to end up having guys paying. Sure, you might have more employment, but you'll just have a lot of people getting employed very low wages. So I think there just needs to be a balance, and I think that's like, as long as people are more aware of, I think we just need to raise awareness amongst the people really at the top, because the people at the top are the people with the power to change stuff. It's the guys that run companies. It's the guys that are in privileged positions, who've got the power to change the country. Because they have they make the decisions of where the money goes. They make the decision of how much money they get paid.
Yeah.
The remuneration boards, all that kind of stuff. It's all these guys. The people. It's people with the power to make changes in people's lives. And they can either make it a big change for their own. They want to make billions or something, or they can make a change that's going to make a difference in the country and to the economy, and actually get the businesses going. I mean, it was like Henry Ford back in the day was one of the first people that was talking about the idea of paying workers properly, so that there's someone to buy your product.
Yeah.
It's really important, and I think what's happening in the situation at the moment with globalization is because the market is all over the place. Not just in one country, we lose sight of how important it is to actually to develop local markets.
Yes.
It's and get people included in the economy. And
Yeah.
I think I have quite an issue with. I know I don't mean to. You get these. Like the think tanks, these like neoliberal think tanks and stuff that are promoting the idea that it's okay just to take as much as you want, and that's the market's the thing. You can cede all your agency to the market, and it's all good, because that's you. And I think that's kind of a very dangerous. It's a dangerous idea, because there needs to be a balance. I think people need to be responsible, and I think that doesn't mean to say that we don't recognize the value of that business leaders add, because I think it's important that the people that drive our economy are the entrepreneurs, the business leaders, the guys with the ideas. They need to be rewarded. Yes, it's very important that we reward people for innovation and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, we shouldn't absolve them of responsibility for the decisions that they make. So I think that's the thing. It's just to find the balance.
So I think what I've been struggling with recently is that a lot of what you're saying is that, so I take it that if you're more right-leaning in your political views, you tend to see the corruption and the potential evil of the government, and your focus tends to be there. So you get suspicious of anything that involves the government having any role to play. And a lot of that justifiably so, because the government, as you mentioned, is notoriously inefficient and corrupt. And then if you're more left-leaning in terms of your political persuasion, you're a lot more likely to spot corruption and injustices in the market that you think need to be corrected somehow. So what I've been struggling with is what you're saying, that we need to appeal to leaders in businesses. We need to basically raise awareness around this and basically persuade them that, look, this is in their interest, because this is making the economy run more efficiently, and ultimately this is going to do more for their businesses. But what I've recognized is that people are not rational. I mean, they're not going to easily shift their way of doing things, mainly because a lot of the time it means getting a lot of other people on board with that. And so their self-interest, so this is in the Randian sense, is not rational self-interest. It's self-interest in the negative sense, in the instant gratification sense. I'm just going to look, it's very short-sighted, and I'm literally just going to look at my next, paycheck. And so if we look at the market in that way, and we see that it's not necessarily the case that the market left to its own devices is going to generate this rational self-interest, because we can look at lots of examples where it doesn't. So I've just from my time in the academy, in industry, I've recognized that so many businesses, they run so inefficiently because there's so many things that they don't want to do, even though someone will sit them down and explain to them, look, this is a problem, you need to deal with it. The company would run better if you do it this way. They won't do it. And it often has to do with a lot of other issues, their personalities, their other people who are involved, etc. So I've actually reached a point where when I defend the market, I think what I'm defending is an idealized version of the market. And in that sense, you start sounding like someone who would say, when you say to someone, well, socialism or communism has never worked ever. And they say, well, that wasn't real communism. And so I'm starting to find myself in a position where people say, well, the market doesn't work. And I say, well, that's not the market at work. And so it's starting to look very similar. But that doesn't help us, because at the end of the day, we're still finding ourselves in this problem of having to convince people who are not open to being convinced. And so you have to have some force, some mechanism that's going to force them to do it. And then we run the risk of unintended consequences. So if the government were to say, we will tax you less if you provide more equal pay across the company, I'm not sure companies would be convinced by that, just because the government is so incompetent and corrupt that they probably would try and take advantage of the situation. And that companies are so reluctant to change, they might just say it's not worth their while. They'll rather pay the tax than actually initiate that sort of change. So while I can agree with a lot of what you're saying, I'm still not sure how would we bring that into being.
So yeah, I mean, like I said, we could offer those incentives and those penalties from government side, which is taxation. And one thing that what I was a bit shocked about, that I was going through the South African Reserve Bank, some stuff that they put out, and they put out, there was a list of the tax rates that people paid over the years. And what I saw was that the tax under the new South Africa since 1994 is way, way less than both for companies and for the richest people, because they had a very progressive taxation system during apartheid. But the guys at the top were getting taxed at over 60% for some years. And the companies were paying 45% on profit. So it's very different now, because you're looking at, in your 20% for companies, I think, if I recall, and the top income earners, is it around 40%? I've forgotten now. But so the progressive taxation thing and the company tax thing under the new South Africa is a lot less than what it was during apartheid. And that was at a time that the economy was actually doing very well. In the 60s and 70s, it was South African economy. If you look at it was actually doing pretty well. And also, I mean, internationally, that was kind of the norm. So I think in America, for instance, in the US, it was about 70% on the top income earners.
Yeah.
So, and that was during the time of really where America was, in the 50s and 60s. They were doing, the American economy was top of the world, So that's an option. If people aren't willing to share, or just, it's just I suppose it's a natural thing. I'm not judging it. It's just, if they're not willing to do it, then the consequence of that will be like either inequality, or the government has to step in and spread it. So it's an option that we have. It's like either or. Either we're gonna have a more equal society where there's more equal opportunity, or we're going to just let inequality carry on the way it is, which has serious consequences in terms of our lives, in terms of crime and all sorts of stuff. So, and I mean, it's definitely it's unsustainable. I'm amazed that South Africa's got this far without some sort of a revolution or anything like that. We're the most unequal country in the world, and you see people living in dire poverty, and we can't carry on like this. It's impossible. So something has to be done.
But then,
so if it's taxation, then the government might have to do that. But it's and the consequences of doing that, even though it's obviously painful to be taxed, if you're at the top and you're the one that's kind of, you seeing it as you kind of funding the whole system. But the reward that happens from that, if you look at the historical stuff, where you have more equal societies happening due to that, is that the rich actually do very well. Their lifestyle actually improves because they're living in society that's more safe. There's more opportunities for their businesses. There's more, there's less turmoil and political turmoil, all that kind of stuff.
But in this country, it's not so clear to me that taxation is an option, mainly because our middle class and our upper class is not big enough for taxation to make a big difference. So even if we look at social grants that we've been upping since the end of apartheid and especially since 2010, it's not enough. There's not enough money to actually make enough of a difference to even that inequality. So, and if you start taxing people more heavily, so I think that I don't have a problem. So, for example, Denmark. So people say that they're socialist. They're not socialist. They're a welfare state, but that's because they tax high, but they basically allow businesses to flourish. They don't have any red tape around. It's so easy to start a business. So that's the payoff. That yes, you get taxed a lot, but the economy is doing well because you're not strangling it with regulations. But in our country, we're strangling the economy with regulations, plus we're now adding tax. And I'm surprised to hear it's actually not as high as it was during apartheid, but maybe that's because during apartheid there weren't as many regulations around businesses, so there was more money to be created. So I think people's concern is that, so even if we do tax the wealthy in this country, what's likely to happen is it's likely to scare people, the rich that we do have, likely to scare them off, because they're thinking, why should I pay these taxes when my business can't flourish because of all the regulations that are strangling it?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought that point up, because that brings us on to the next issue, which is the reason for taxation. This is what South Africans really need to understand, is that the monetary system, when I just heard you say that we don't have money to do stuff, which is not true at all. There's the state has as much money as it wants. It's only limited in the amount of money that it can spend by inflation. So what's happening in South Africa is that we're getting overtaxed at the moment. because we have the wrong idea about what taxation is for. Because taxation isn't actually to fund government. And as soon as we can actually start understanding that taxation doesn't fund government,
Okay.
it's actually what happens is that the way the financial system works is that government, the state, is the source of the money that we use, of the currency that we use. So the state is the issuer of rands, and the state puts money into the system through franchising money creation to the private banks. So the private banks create money when they loan, when they issue loans. They're creating what they call commercial bank money, which is based on the promise to pay South African Reserve Bank rands. And so you've got the money coming in through the bank. It's the franchises of the state, money creation. And then the state can also spend money into the economy through state spending. So the state is spending the rands into the system, and it's lending rands into the system. And then the taxation and interest returns those rands back to the state.
Okay.
So if once you understand that, then you have a different perspective about what taxation is for. Taxation is actually to reduce inflation, it's to reduce inequality, and it's to increase the value of the currency, of the rand, basically, and also to affect people's behaviors. So you can, like what we were talking about with moderating pay gaps or carbon emissions, all that kind of stuff. You can get people to do stuff by taxing certain behaviors or not to do stuff, So you got what's happening is the state spending and lending, and then it's taxing the money back in order to reduce the money in the private sector, in bank accounts. So you get that's reducing inflation.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to stop thinking that there's no money, that the state doesn't have money. What's actually happening is, at the moment, is because we think that the state doesn't have money and that it's reliant on the private sector for money, then there's this almost like an idea that we need to tax the private sector in order for the state to do anything.
Yeah.
And that's just wrong. So once we understand that the state is actually the one that's creating the money, then we understand that the state can actually spend as much as it wants, as long as it doesn't create inflation. And when it does spend the money into the system, it's actually creating opportunities and jobs and income and savings and profits for the private sector. So when the state, and then that money gets spent onwards into what they call it the fiscal multiplier, where if you get paid by the state to do something, you're going to take that money, either save it or you're going to spend it.
Yeah.
And that's going to push up somebody else's income.
Yeah.
And so the private sector is dependent on this money from the state, either through lending through the banks or from state spending.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't do that, then you start having this shortage of money in the system. You start getting unemployment. You start getting all these problems, and you can get inflation through different mechanisms. So you can get inflation from having too much money in the system, and people have got too much buying power. But you can also get inflation from producers going out of business.
Yeah.
If all the wheat farmers went bang, for instance, and there was no wheat, the wheat price would go through the roof. And often that's actually what causes hyperinflation, is that the local producers, like what happened in Zimbabwe, the tobacco farms and they stopped producing, so they didn't their primary exports. And when people talk about government spending, it was like, oh, you're going to be like in Zimbabwe, but it's a very different. It's much easier to control inflation from too much money, because then you just raise taxes and interest rates, you pull the money out of the system. It's a lot easier to do that than to control inflation that's caused by your producers going out of business. To
Yeah.
get a company going and to get like things made is a lot harder than just to like slow the economy down.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, is that we've got economists at the moment in South Africa are very much they've got everything backwards. So everyone thinks that the state's dependent on the private sector, and then because of that, all the economic system is all the economics that they are recommending that we follow is all backwards, and we end up having this austerity system, and it's not benefiting South Africans.
Yeah, definitely.
It's not benefiting the private sector. It's not benefiting companies. It's not benefiting the producers.
Yeah. So I think we need to just turn to some questions from the audience if there are any. I suppose, as I also just wanted to say, I suppose the reason why people think the government is out of money is because Cyril Ramaphosa said the government has no money. So that's not a great message to send out to the people.
Yeah, that's the thing. Who's advising him? Give me a call, Cyril. I'll talk you straight.
So do we have any questions from the audience? Okay. Okay. Buddy, do you wanna?
Okay. Yeah. So I think what they mean is that equal opportunity is that to give people the same opportunities. So basically, so a child growing up anywhere in South Africa, that they have the same education, the same access to capital, that kind of stuff as someone that grows up somewhere else in South Africa. So that's equal opportunity. And then equal outcomes would be that if everybody was paid exactly the same to do whatever work they did. So almost like a communist state where everyone's getting the same paycheck. So there's a difference between the two. But the thing is that because opportunity is governed by your income, as Dioné said, they are related in a sense. It's impossible to have the same opportunity if you grow up in the township as to someone that's growing up in Bishop's Court or somewhere. It's just not practically possible.
Yeah, I think also because this is a party of equal opportunity, prosperity, liberty, and equity. So I think people would also wonder, when you say equity, most of us are thinking equality of outcomes. And that makes people think of a communist state. And that's
No, equity. I think equity is more like, well, first of all, there's a justice element to it. So it's,
okay.
But also, that there's that famous cartoon, you must have seen it, where it's like they have equality when people are trying to see something and there's like a fence, and then the smallest person can't actually see over the fence, and the tallest person is. And then it's like equity is like, there's like the smallest person standing on a little block and he can see over the fence. So it's like you're giving everybody, and it's a balanced.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's got more to do with justice and just recognizing the fact that we do come from an unjust past. South Africa, and even currently with what's happening at the moment. It's not just that that some people are growing up in, like kids are living in dire poverty, whatever the reasons that it's for. There's so many reasons that go into that, past and present. So it's important that, I think it's important that everybody, that we do what we can to get, everybody out of those dire situations.
Yeah. So, are there any more questions?
Yes. Yanni Vandervalts was asking earlier, would the effective creation of low-level jobs not start aiding to removing inequality? Creating jobs gives inclusion, even if it's low-skilled, ? Your opinions?
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for work. This is the thing also that's one of the things that I'm quite interested in is modern monetary theory. I don't consider myself to be a modern monetary theorist, but I read a lot of modern monetary theory, and it makes a lot of sense, And one of the things that they talk about is the fact that the state can actually employ people to do what we need. Like, the state doesn't have a shortage of money, and we could actually be employing people to patrol our streets, like unemployed people could be keeping our women and children safe. They could be cleaning up rubbish. They could be building green energy stuff. They could, they could be shifting our economy towards, the sustainable energy and all that kind of stuff. And the government's got the money to do it. And when they put the money into the system, it's going to actually create, if they do it productively, it doesn't need to create inflation, because you're creating, for instance, if you had to put money into energy production, you've got more energy, so the prices can come down. Or you can, food production, the food prices will go down. And if there is any kind of inflationary stuff, there's only so many times in the system that money can get spent before it goes back to the state. If you look at the moment with VAT and income tax and stuff like that, if the government spends R1 into the economy, it can only change hands a few times before most of it's back at the state. So we have the ability to employ people, and the thing is, at the moment, the private sector is incapable of doing it.
Well, I mean, the way I was coming to the question of inequality in the workplace, because I agree with you that that's where the problem is that inequality in the workplace. But I was coming at it from the perspective of, well, then what we need more skilled workers. We need people who can rise through a company and can actually perform the roles that they need to perform, so that they can't be so easily exploited and they can't be taken advantage of in certain ways, because they are actually skilled enough to do that work. And that's, for me, why the post-94 move to close down the colleges and close down all the educational centers that were training people to be artisans, to be manufacturers, and to be producing in the economy was literally the worst blunder ever, because that was a rich source of skill development that has now has deteriorated so much that and the government is so incompetent and lacks the willpower to actually rejuvenate those spaces.
Well, I mean, I think that the ANC was kind of bought into this smaller government thing, very big time in the 90s, and less government spending, and we're reaping the effects of that now. I agree with you completely. There's no reason why we shouldn't be spending money educating our people. That's like that's, if you think about it, that's educating people. We can't afford not to do it. First of all, that's the most important thing that we should be doing. The government doesn't have a shortage of money that it can spend on educating people, and if you educate people, what happens is that when those people, come into the economy, they have the skills that they, to create stuff. You got more entrepreneurs, you got more productivity, you've got a larger supply of skills, so that brings down the prices of skills. You got more production of goods, that brings down the prices of goods. You got more exports, you got less imports, so that protects the value of the rand. So if you look at the inflationary effects of spending on education, you're actually getting a very good return. Spending on education, it's going to reduce inflation. And the South African Reserve Bank's mandate is to protect the value of the currency in the interest of balanced and sustainable growth. And can you think of anything that would be like, that's the South African Reserve Bank could be investing money itself in education. If it thinks that the government's corrupt or whatever, it could pay companies to educate people, could pay private sector. The South African Reserve Bank is independent, but if you look at the South African Reserve Bank Act, it allows the South African Reserve Bank to invest in private companies. So it could even give people education vouchers. So the South African Reserve Bank could give people money to spend on education.
And that's but people are starting to think that the government has a vested interest in keeping the population stupid, because it doesn't make any sense that you would cut the legs out from people by not investing in it. And when I say that, I'm not just saying pouring money into it, because the government spends a lot of money on education, but
it's not a lot, actually. I disagree with you, because the government's spending. Say that again.
But I mean, so let's just say comparatively, they spend, in terms of the budget, they do spend quite a lot. It's comparatively to other countries, it's also quite a lot. But that doesn't.
To what countries though? That's the thing, because
I saw a article where it was comparing it to Germany, and I think it was the States. They were saying the percentage of the budget that's spent on education compares to those countries. But my concern is it's not about pouring money into it, it's about the quality of what it is you're doing. So you can pour money into building schools, let's say, or they're not even doing that, but let's say they were. But if you're not teaching teachers how to be good at their jobs, and if you're not cultivating quality education, doesn't matter how much money you throw at the problem. And what I've experienced in the academy is very much that this attitude of throwing money at the problem, but not maintaining standards of excellence, so that students have to live up to that and actually get the skills they need to be participating in the economy. And that's where people start thinking the government is purposefully trying to keep the masses uneducated, so that they are more easily malleable, so that they are easier to get votes from, because they're not educated enough to challenge the government in any way.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that before. I'm not sure I buy into that, but I mean, I can't. I'm not in the position to really judge that. But for me, that doesn't make as much sense as what the idea that having people just like a workforce of cheap labor that don't have the skills and the bargaining power to negotiate themselves out of getting paid. So it's I'm actually not sure if it. I think that a lot of South Africans' problem is just that we've been hoodwinked by economists. It's like the idea that we don't have money to spend on education, for instance, that's we keep getting told that the government gets, like, for instance, you said that the government's spending a lot of money on education, but the government spent 16, I think the last time I looked, it might have gone up. No, this was a couple of years ago. They were spending about 16,000 Rand per learner per year. And I mean, I'm a father. I send my kids to school. I know how much school fees cost.
I know. It's not that.
16,000 Rand is not going to get you into a good school. I mean, maybe if you're lucky, I don't know, there might be some schools out there for that. We middle class and I suppose the rich as well, they understand. We understand what education, how much it's worth. We find the middle class people you're paying 50,000, 60,000 Rand a year on your child's school fees.
Yeah.
And then the government's spending a third of that on and the schools that we're sending our kids to are actually subsidized as well. They've got smaller subsidies, but so not all that money is going to the poorer schools. So yeah, is it enough? No, it's not. It's not enough. We should be spending, if you want to get like a good education, you need to spend more money on a kid. And there's money to spend, We see the money, it's obviously corruption and everything. There's money that's out there. But even if it wasn't for the corruption, there's money. The government can create as many rands as it wants and spend it on education. That would be the first thing that's the most important thing we could ever do. The fact that we're not doing it, I think it's shocking that we can actually sit in this 2020 and we're still having this conversation where most people don't actually know that the government creates rands. They don't think about it because we've all been brainwashed into where we think that the government doesn't have money, which is bizarre. It's really bizarre.
Thank you. Is there any more questions, Joe? I think we need to wrap up. Okay, we're done. Cool. Thank you so much. That was a really rich and important conversation because I think you've raised a lot of things that I also haven't thought about. So thank you so much for joining me. And thank you to everyone who's tuned in. I hope you found it valuable. Please share it and comment and just let people know if you think it's worth sharing. And thank you to everyone. Have a good evening.
Thanks, Dioné.
Hey guys, so if you enjoyed the show, please consider giving it a like and a share. Don't forget to subscribe as well if you're new to my channel. And if you really enjoyed the content, feel free to join and become a member. Don't forget about my fight against cancel culture. That's in the link in the description below. Support my fight against cancel culture. Go to that link and all the information is there. Other than that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching.